Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting deeply informed on some of the world's most hidden stories. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating. The world of Russian deep cover intelligence officers. They're known simply as illegals.
Yeah, these are operatives who spend, well, years, sometimes their entire adult lives, building completely new identities. No official connection, no diplomatic immunity if things go wrong.
It sounds like an unbelievable level of commitment, like something out of a spy novel.
It really is. It's arguably the most extreme path in espionage. We're talking strategic patience, a generational long game. And our sources, they detail not just the incredible tradecraft, but the psychological endurance required. It's astonishing. And it has deep roots, going all the way back to revolutionary Russia.
Okay, so let's start with a modern case that really brings this home. You mentioned one that sounds almost unbelievable, the soccer mom spy.
Right. Elena and Andrei Vavlov, or, as their neighbors knew them, Anne Foley and Don Heathfield. Their arrest back in 2010 was a huge shock.
Because they seem so normal.
Completely. They'd settled in Toronto, had two sons, Tim and Alex. Then they moved to the U.S., and Andrei Don Heathfield actually got into Harvard's Kennedy School. Pretty impressive cover.
Then Elena, she was the soccer mom.
Exactly. According to her own accounts, she played that role perfectly. You know, running the house, chores, raising the kids, utterly convincing.
But behind the scenes, totally different story.
Oh, yeah. Once the kids were asleep, it wasn't about catching up on emails. She'd go into a back room, pull out the shortwave radio, and decrypt these long, complex coded messages directly from Moscow, from the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Agency.
Wow, so this case really highlights the difference between types of spies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's crucial for understanding this. Most people think of spies under official cover, diplomats, trade attachés, that kind of thing.
The ones working out of embassies.
Right. And they're relatively easy to track. Intelligence agencies know who they probably are.
Yeah.
If they get caught red-handed, well, they have diplomatic immunity. They just get declared persona non grata and put on a plane home.
A polite expulsion.
Pretty much. But the illegal operates under non-official cover, NOC. They pretend to be completely ordinary people.
Like a business person or
Yeah.
a piano tuner. I think I read that somewhere.
Exactly. If a piano tuner, a gallery owner, or like Elena, a housewife, they can move around freely without that embassy surveillance spotlight. But the price is immense.
No immunity.
None. If they're exposed, they face the full force of the law. Long prison sentences. There's no safety net.
And maintaining that lie for decades, even to your own children. That takes a specific mindset, surely.
Oh, absolutely. Elena herself talked about this. She said people who need external validation, you know, a pat on the back, public praise, they'd never make the cut as illegals. She put it perfectly. A spy is an actor, but an actor that doesn't need a public or a stage. The mission itself is the reward.
So they lived this complete lie, never spoke Russian to the kid.
Never. Never mentioned Russia. They had to invent reasons for everything, like routine errands to cover up secret meetings with SVR handlers. Imagine keeping that up day after day, year after year.
It's exhausting just thinking about it, that level of constant performance. Okay, so that intense psychological commitment defines the modern illegal. But where did this whole concept, this need for extreme underground work, actually come from? It goes way back, doesn't it?
Way back, over a century. The rulebook wasn't written in some KGB office in the 50s. It was forged during the Russian Revolution based on Lenin's ideas for how to seize power.
Lenin. So this was fundamental to the Bolshevik strategy?
Absolute fundamental. He knew that to overthrow the Tsar, they needed two kinds of activity. There was the legal work, open stuff like printing newspapers, organizing unions, public agitation.
A visible part.
Right. But he knew that alone wasn't enough. It could be easily crushed. So they also needed illegal work. Ilionaya work, clandestine, completely underground operations.
You needed both the fist and the shadow.
Exactly. You needed to combine the legal and illegal networks to succeed. And to make that illegal network function without getting wiped out, they developed these incredibly strict rules of secrecy. They called it konspiratsiya.
Konspiratsiya. Okay.
Early Bolsheviks were constantly hunted by the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana. So they adopted covers, pretending to be writers, salesmen, anything, and they had to follow konspiratsiya religiously. The absolute core principle was compartmentalization.
Right, keeping everything separate. How did that work in practice, especially when they needed to coordinate?
Well, they kept contact between the legal and illegal sides to an absolute minimum. And within the illegal network itself, it was strictly need to know. Each underground operative would usually only have contact with one person, their handler, who was the link back to the central leadership.
So if one agent got caught,
They couldn't betray the others because they literally didn't know who they were or where they operated. It insulated the network. Compromise one node, the rest could hopefully survive.
and that basic principle, that depth separation, is still fundamental today, even with all the technology.
It's the bedrock. It's proven remarkably durable. What's amazing is how the language stuck, too. The intelligence headquarters, still called the center. Yep. A secret meeting place. Still a konspiratsiya, a conspiratorial apartment. The terms Lenin's revolutionaries used against the Tsar were the same ones Elena Vavilov would have understood in 2010.
A konspiratsiya, that sounds so physical. How does that translate today with digital surveillance everywhere? Seems like a risky concept.
That's a great point. The word itself might feel old-fashioned, but the idea behind it is still critical. Today, a konspiratsiya might not be a physical apartment. It could be, say, a highly secure encrypted server for communication.
Ah, okay.
Or maybe a shell company's office used only for preparing secure documents, totally separate from the agent's real life. The tools change paper and chalk, become VPNs and encryption, but the goal is the same. A safe space, physical or virtual, totally compartmentalized from the agent's public identity.
It wasn't just theory either. These early guys were pretty audacious in practice. You mentioned Stalin's early work.
Yeah, Yosef Dugashvili Stalin. His codename was Koba back when he was operating in Baku. His job was basically funding the party. Bank robberies, extortion schemes, that kind of thing.
High-stakes fundraising.
Definitely. And he wasn't just following konspiratsiya. He was innovating. Like that story about the coffin.
Right. Tell us about that. It sounds incredibly elaborate.
It really was. He apparently told a trusted female contact, maybe a girlfriend, to hide secret party documents inside a coffin. Then she had to stage a full public burial, act like a grieving sister, tears, the whole performance, bury the coffin in a graveyard.
Just incredible.
And then days later, a completely different agent, someone unconnected to her, would come and secretly dig up the body to get the documents. It's pure theater, but designed for maximum security.
What was the point of such drama? Just to confuse the police?
Yeah.
Or something else?
But certainly confuse the police. If the woman got arrested, what could she say? She buried a relative. Nobody suspects the grave itself is the dead drop. But it probably also sent a message internally. It showed the absolute seriousness, the creativity, the ruthlessness of the organization in protecting its secrets. It reinforced the stakes for everyone involved, a mix of operational security and psychological control.
And this wasn't unique to Stalin. You mentioned Mir Trilesser using his own illness.
Yeah, another great example of blending in.
Yeah.
When the anti-Bolshevik white forces took over a town called Blagoveshchensk, Trilesser had to disappear fast.
So he hid.
First, yeah, in a konspiratsiya.
Yeah.
But then he did something brilliant. He had genuine, serious lung problems.
Yeah.
So he used that. He emerged from hiding, pretending to be a wounded white sympathizer. His real illness got him admitted to a hospital.
Which was full of his enemies.
Exactly. Full of white officers. He just lay there, recuperating alongside them, listening to everything they said, gathering intelligence just by being sick in the right place. He became invisible by exploiting his own vulnerability.
That's incredible commitment. Using a real health risk as cover, and he eventually got messages out.
Yeah, apparently through a visitor who posed as a merchant, maintaining that separation right to the end.
So guys like Trilesser, with that kind of high-risk experience, they rose through the ranks after the revolution.
They did. Trilesser became a key figure. Eventually, he headed up the INO, the Foreign Department of the Cheka, the first Soviet foreign intelligence agency. And their headquarters was at number 2, Lubyanka Square.
Lubyanka. That address becomes infamous, doesn't it?
The enduring symbol. And INO in the 1920s had 2 main jobs, reflecting how fragile the new Soviet state felt.
Right. What were they focused on?
First, protect the regime from enemies abroad, especially Tsarist sympathizers who'd fled to places like Paris or Prague and were plotting a comeback.
Makes sense.
Second, and this was much bigger, they were tasked with exporting the revolution. They had to instruct communist parties in other countries, Germany, France, the U.S., wherever, on how to set up their own parallel illegal networks, basically building secret armies in waiting around the world.
And because the Soviet Union wasn't recognized by many countries then, they didn't have embassies everywhere.
Exactly. So often, these illegals weren't just supplementing diplomatic efforts. They were the only eyes and ears, the only tool for influence they had in many places. They were building this global revolutionary infrastructure from scratch.
Which must have required some serious support, like forgery.
Oh, forgery was absolutely critical. The forgery department back in Lubyanka was top tier.
What made it so hard back then? We think of digital fakes now, but this was hands-on.
It was incredibly skilled work. Passports in the 20s were often just flimsy paper, maybe 1 or 2 pages. But the printing, the watermarks, the official stamps, they had to be perfect.
Right.
The Lubyanka team often worked with real documents they'd bought or stolen. They'd have to carefully swap photos without leaving a trace, mix inks to exactly match the color and age of original seals, even carve replica stamps to show fake border crossings. Get it wrong, and the illegal is caught instantly. Get it right, they could operate for years.
And funding all this, that required some creative, maybe morally dubious methods too, like Yakov Blumkin.
Blumkin's story is amazing, yeah. He was operating in the Middle East, posing as a Persian merchant. And how was he funding Trellisser's network? By selling ancient religious manuscripts.
Selling religious texts.
Yes, texts that had been systematically looted from synagogues in Ukraine, from libraries in Moscow, basically stolen by the new, officially atheist Soviet government.
Wow. The cynicism is pretty staggering.
Destroying cultural heritage to fund secret operations abroad. It tells you a lot about their priorities. But it got them the hard currency they desperately needed because the Soviet ruble was worthless internationally.
Selling holy books to fund world revolution.
Okay? But beyond the support structures, the real magic was the agents themselves. And maybe the most brilliant example from this era was Dmitry Bystrolyotov.
The artist. He seems like an unlikely spy. But you mentioned the KGB often had to recruit outside the usual mold.
Exactly. They didn't have a large pool of sophisticated, multilingual citizens who traveled the West. Bystrolyotov was perfect. He was passionate, maybe a bit moody, an artist type. But by his late 20s, he spoke fluent Russian, English, French, Turkish, Czech.
Wow. How?
He already lived several lives. Aristocrat, refugee, student, even manual laborer. He was naturally adaptable. The center just needed to channel that talent.
And his process for creating his cover identity, Josef Pirelli, the Hungarian count, was obsessive.
Totally obsessive.
Yeah.
It wasn't just getting a fake passport. He went to Budapest.
Yeah.
He immersed himself. He bought books on Hungarian history so he could talk the talk authentically. He ordered custom-made suits, got his fictional coat of arms put on his pipes and stationery.
He was method acting as cover.
Pretty much. Every tiny detail had to reinforce the legend. So he wouldn't have to consciously act like Pirelli. He would just be Pirelli.
And the most audacious part was manufacturing a connection to the Hungarian cardinal.
It's brilliant, wasn't it? During some big public procession, he managed to get himself photographed standing right next to the cardinal. He then kept that photo in his wallet.
So he could just casually drop it into conversation.
Exactly. Oh yes, the cardinal. A distant family connection. It gave his fake identity this layer of real-world, high-status validation that was almost impossible to question. Much better than just a piece of paper.
That's genius. And this cover got put to the test pretty quickly with the Oldham case, right? Ernest Oldham, the British Foreign Office guy selling secrets.
Right. Oldham was a typesetter, desperate for cash. Bystrolyotov, as Pirelli, was tasked with handling him, along with his controller, Boris Bezarov.
And Bezarov had his own cover.
Yeah. Bezarov was posing as an irritable Italian communist called Da Vinci. And Bystrolyotov played this beautifully. He approached Oldham first, not as a handler, but as a fellow victim. He complained about the aggressive Italian, Bezarov, basically implying, look, we're both in the same boat, forced to take Moscow's money because we're broke.
Ah, creating false solidarity. I'm not your handler. I'm just like you. Caught in this.
Precisely. It lowered Oldham's guard, made him feel understood, not pressured by some ideologue. Once Oldham was securely recruited and passing documents, Bystrolyotov performed the final act. He found out where Oldham hung out.
And just appeared.
Waited until Oldham, who he only knew as Charlie, was sitting alone in a cafe. Then Bystrolyotov walked in, sat down right next to him, and just watched him. Didn't say a word initially.
The psychological pressure must have been immense.
Bystrolyotov reported back on the immediate fear in Ernest Oldham's eyes. He knew in that instant his secret life was compromised. Bystrolyotov coolly noted how their fingers were tightening around his throat. It shows the kind of cold, calculated control these top illegals had in the 30s. They were just spies. They were masters of psychological manipulation.
So agents like Bystrolyotov were incredibly effective, using konspiratsiya to operate deep inside enemy territory. But then came Stalin's purges in the late 1930s, and the very system they served turned on them.
It's the terrible irony, isn't it? These men risked everything abroad, only to be recalled to Moscow and destroyed by their own side. Bystrolyotov, the virtuoso illegal, was arrested in 1937.
And tortured.
Brutally. Sources say he lost teeth, had his breastbone broken, and the confession they forced out of him was just perverse.
They made him say his whole career was a lie.
Worse, they made him confess that his entire life as a Soviet illegal was actually an elaborate cover for being a Western agent, a double illegal, essentially. Imagine the psychological torment of being forced to negate your life's work like that.
Unthinkable. What happened to him?
Sentenced to 20 years in the Gulag, and his controller, Boris Bezarov, the Italian from the Oldham case, recalled and shot, enemy of the people.
Did that constant fear, the paranoia from Moscow, actually make them better spies, or did it just cripple them eventually?
That's a tough question. It definitely didn't stop the program. You could argue it enforced a certain ruthlessness. Failure wasn't just getting fired, it could be fatal. But it must have amplified the paranoia, maybe leading agents to prioritize telling the center what it wanted to hear, rather than the objective truth. But even with the purges raging, deep cover remained essential for high-risk missions. The most famous example is probably the assassination of Leon Trotsky.
Operation Duck, right, in Mexico in 1940.
Exactly. Stalin ordered it in 1939. Pavel Bystrolyotov was put in charge, though apparently he thought the initial plans were amateurish.
And the first attempt failed.
It did. But the second succeeded, thanks to Ramon Mercader. And his success was pure long-game illegal tradecraft. He didn't rush in. He spent months meticulously integrating himself into Trotsky's inner circle by becoming the lover of Sylvia Agelov, someone close to Trotsky. It took incredible patience and deception just to get physically close enough for that final attack with the ice pick.
So the rules of konspiratsiya, the deep cover skills, were used to kill one of the revolution's original thinkers.
The ultimate dark irony. Trotsky helped build the system, and the system used its own clandestine methods to eliminate him.
But even without the purges, the psychological burden of living a lie took its toll. Loneliness seems to have been a major weakness in the 50s.
Loneliness was a killer, operationally speaking. Look at the case of Brick, who was working as David Soboleff in Canada.
What happened to him?
The pressure just got to him. He fell in love with a married woman, Larissa, in Winnipeg. And in a moment of emotional weakness, he confessed everything, his real identity, his mission.
Breaking the cardinal rule.
Completely. Larissa was apparently horrified and convinced him to go to the Canadian authorities. So he was caught, and they turned him into a double agent.
So he worked for the Canadians?
For a few years, yes. But eventually, Moscow figured it out, possibly tipped off by a compromised Canadian officer, lured him back under a false pretext in 1955, arrested him right on the tarmac, and he got 15 years, all stemming from that one moment of confessing out of loneliness.
And he wasn't the only one. There was Anatoly Rudenko, the piano tuner.
Right. Heinz Walter Federer, his cover name. Operating in New York, same pattern. He married a local hairdresser.
I told her.
Told her everything. Even worse, he started decoding his secret radio messages right there in their apartment with her watching. Total violation of security protocols.
Unbelievable risk.
He was immediately recalled to Moscow, stripped of his rank, and basically lived out his days in disgrace. The center knew that any emotional leak, however small, could unravel everything. Love was a liability.
Before we move past the Stalin era, there's one more incredible story, the mission that almost happened. Yosif Grigorovich.
Ah, yes, Grigorovich. He was maybe one of the most successful illegals ever. His cover was astonishing. Teodoro Castro, the charming, well-liked Costa Rican ambassador to Italy and Yugoslavia.
An illegal posing as a diplomat, using the very immunity he was supposed to be spying against.
Exactly. It was the perfect shield. He moved in the highest circles in Rome and Belgrade. Absolutely seamless integration.
And in 1953, Stalin gave him a mission, assassinate Tito.
Josip Broz Tito, the leader of Yugoslavia, who had broken with Stalin. The plan was deadly serious. Grigorovich was given options. Either use a dose of powdered plague, or perhaps a poison jewelry box.
Biological weapons. This was basically a state-sponsored assassination attempt.
Absolutely. And a center knew it was likely a one-way trip. They even told Grigorovich to write a farewell letter to his wife. He was preparing to deploy a bioweapon against another head of state.
But then fate intervened.
Just as he was likely finalizing preparations, news came from Moscow. Stalin had collapsed at his dacha. He died 4 days later.
And the mission was off.
Instantly scrubbed. The new leadership had other priorities, so Grigorovich, as Ambassador Castro, proceeded to Belgrade. But instead of carrying plague powder, he brought a diplomatic gift, a sack of the finest Costa Rican coffee.
From bioweapon to gourmet beans.
Imagine the relief he must have felt. That sudden swerve perfectly captures the insane high-wire act these agents lived under Stalin.
Okay, so after Stalin, moving into the Cold War proper, the 60s and 70s, Did the illegals program change? Did it become more professionalized?
It definitely did. The KGB realized they needed a more systematic approach. Since they still didn't have lots of Soviets who could naturally pass as Westerners, the training became this incredibly intensive, years-long process. It wasn't just about language, it was about fundamentally transforming a person.
Like Yuri Linov, who became Karl Byrne model, his training sounds like a psychological endurance test.
It absolutely was. It was designed to push them to their limits, test their loyalty constantly, like the incident when his parents came to visit him during training.
Right, the KGB bugged his apartment.
Yeah. They weren't listening for state secrets. They were listening to see if Linov would slip up, even for a second, with his own mother and father. He had to stick rigidly to his cover story, that he worked for some scientific institute in Kyiv. No mention of the KGB, no hint of his real life.
Testing his deepest emotional loyalties.
Exactly. Any crack, any moment of letting his guard down, even with family, would mean failure. Recall, end of career. The compartmentalization had to be absolute, even in his own mind.
And another key part of this era was finding spouses, right? A single man might look suspicious long term.
Right. The center decided that for long-term deep cover, a family provided better camouflage.
Right.
So Linov was told he needed a wife.
And the KGB played matchmaker.
Pretty much. They introduced him to 3 pre-vetted female students. He ended up courting one, Tamara Kovalenko. But even the courtship was part of the test.
How so?
He had to persuade her to join the service.
Mm.
Initially, he convinced her to go on this fake espionage cruise. Her assignment was just to monitor some German tourists, a sort of low-stakes trial run.
So the whole relationship started under false pretenses, essentially an audition.
Yes. And what finally sealed the deal, the KGB offered them a major incentive if she agreed to marry him and join the illegals program, a desirable apartment in central Kyiv.
Which in the Soviet Union was a huge deal.
A massive privilege. It showed how much the state valued this commitment. So they married, trained together, and were eventually deployed. Linov, as Karl Byrne model, ended up in Ireland.
Why Ireland?
Critically, Ireland didn't have a Soviet embassy at the time. So, as the main illegal there, Linov was effectively Moscow's top man on the ground.
And his cover job wasn't exactly glamorous, selling bath mats.
Bath mats, Japanese TV magnifying screens.
Mm-hmm.
These weren't about making money. They were just plausible excuses to exist, to travel, and most importantly, to strike up conversations with locals, potentially government officials, business people, anyone who might have useful information or access.
Selling things nobody really needed to meet people they definitely did need.
That's it exactly. Inventive, low-key pretexts for contact.
And managing risk, meeting handlers still relied on those old konspiratsiya principles, even in the 70s, like the dead drops.
Yeah, incredibly sophisticated dead drops. He used one in Prater Park in Vienna. It wasn't just leaving a package under a bench.
Yeah.
It was a specific, tiny hiding spot, like a nook under some concrete steps. And he'd never meet his handler, the support officer from Line N, directly. Communication was all signals.
How did the signals work?
Okay, so if Linov had information to pass, he'd go to a specific lamppost near the park entrance and leave a prearranged chalk mark, just a small symbol.
That told the handler a package was waiting.
Right. The handler would see the mark, check if the area was clear, then go retrieve the package from the hidden spot under the steps. Then, to signal back to Linov that the package was collected and it was safe, the handler would leave a different chalk mark on a specific park bench nearby.
Wow. 2 different signals, 2 different locations, 0 direct contact.
Exactly. It's this intricate dance of secrecy designed to minimize risk at every step. Pure operational choreography.
But even with all that tradecraft, the human cost was still there. Linov struggled.
He did. Sources say he was often deeply unhappy, constantly thinking about his wife Tamara, and especially their daughter, Natalia, who was born after he was deployed. He hadn't even met her yet.
He must have questioned if it was all worth it.
Apparently he did. Questioned his whole existence, the separation from the family he'd only built because the service required it. The psychological toll was immense.
And that toll, that sacrifice, leads to perhaps the most extreme example. The second-generation illegals. Like Rudy Herman's plan for his son.
Rudy Herman was a major illegal, operating as a Canadian sound technician in the U.S. He felt frustrated, felt he wasn't penetrating the circles he needed to think tanks like the Hudson Institute. So he came up with this radical, long-term plan.
Involving his own son, Peter.
Yes. In 1974, they were on a trip in South America. Rudy revealed his true identity to Peter, who was only 16 at the time, and basically asked him if he'd be willing to follow in his footsteps, become an intelligence officer.
And Peter agreed.
He did, initially. He was later sent to Moscow for training. But that initial agreement quickly became something else.
Oh,
Absolutely. His handlers in Moscow made it crystal clear. Okay, you've agreed in principle, but if you change your mind now, you know too much. You know who your parents really are, what their mission is. So you can't go back. You'd have to stay here in Moscow indefinitely until your parents' mission ends, which could be decades.
So agree or be trapped in Moscow. Not much of a choice.
None at all. It was a psychological trap, leveraging his love for his parents against him. Utterly ruthless.
The morality of using your own child like that, it's chilling.
And it wasn't unique. Other illegal couples faced similar, impossible choices regarding their children. There's one story in the sources about a couple who had a baby while stationed abroad. They brought the child back to Moscow for a visit.
And the child learned some Russian.
Exactly. The baby, only about a year old, picked up enough Russian phrases that the parents realized it would blow their cover if they took him back west.
So what did they do?
They left him behind, left their one-year-old son in Moscow with relatives, and went back to their post. They told their Western friends and neighbors the baby had died in a tragic accident.
My God.
Imagine the psychological fortitude or perhaps the damage required to make that decision, to essentially erase your own child from your cover life to protect the mission. It's just breathtakingly cold.
Okay, fast forward to 1991. The Soviet Union collapses. The intelligence services are in disarray, funding slashed. You'd think that would be the end of the illegals program?
You might think so. There was definitely a period of disillusionment, but the program didn't die. It just went into hibernation. And its revival is really tied to one man, Vladimir Putin.
Because he came from the KGB.
Not just the KGB. He specifically worked in supporting illegals' operations when he was stationed in East Germany. He understood the program, respected the commitment involved. So, as he consolidated power and split in funding to the SVR, the illegals program saw a resurgence. He had an institutional fondness for it.
And this reveals something about Russian intelligence culture, doesn't it? This preference for the illegal, the clandestine source.
It really does. There seems to be this deep-seated belief, maybe stemming from that old konspiratsiya paranoia, that official channels, diplomats, open sources are inherently unreliable, maybe compromised, or just telling you what you want to hear.
So the information from an illegal, even if it's just a stab in the dark, feels more authentic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It arrives in that top-secret red folder, gathered at great personal risk, completely outside official channels. It carries this aura of unpainted raw truth. It's a bias towards secrecy itself.
And this revitalized program led, eventually, to the big FBI roundup in 2010, including the Vavilovs. But that only happened because of a defector.
That's right. The whole network was compromised by a high-level insider, Alexander Potiev. He was the deputy head of the SVR department responsible for illegals in North and South America. He gave them up.
So the FBI knew about the Vavilovs, the soccer mom, and the Harvard student.
They'd been tracking them for years. They were even listening to the same shortwave radio signals Alina was decoding. But listening isn't enough to prosecute. They needed concrete proof linking them back to Russia, something undeniable.
And they found it in a safe deposit box, something tiny.
Incredibly tiny, yeah. A strip of photographic negative film. Now, standard SVR tradecraft was to meticulously snip off the edges of the film negatives to remove the manufacturer's markings.
Okay.
And on almost every single frame on this strip, the edges were snipped off,
Mm.
except one. On that one frame, the little margin was intact, and you could clearly read the Cyrillic word. Tasma,
Casimir.
a well-known Soviet-era film manufacturer. That one tiny five-letter word missed on one frame was the smoking gun. It proved their connection back to the Soviet Union, shattering decades of carefully crafted cover.
Wow. All that work, undone by one missed snip. It also suggests maybe the training wasn't quite as rigorous after the collapse.
That seems likely. There were definitely lapses. Look at the case of Vladimir and Lydia Guryev, who were posing as Richard Murphy and Cynthia Hopkins.
Murphy's cover seems almost comical compared to someone like Bystrolyotov.
It really was. He enrolled in a program at the New School in New York. And who was his academic supervisor? Nina Khrushcheva.
Nikita Khrushchev's granddaughter.
Seriously.
Seriously.
And she said she immediately noticed his incredibly thick Russian accent and just general Russian mannerisms. He clearly wasn't a born and bred American.
What was his explanation?
His pre-prepared cover story was, wait for it, he just had a Russian nanny growing up.
A Russian nanny who gave him an accent like he'd just flown in from Moscow? That's not convincing.
Not remotely. It showed a real decline from the kind of deep psychological transformation guys like Linov went through. But despite these failures, the program persisted.
And then came 2022, the invasion of Ukraine. That must have drastically changed the landscape for Russian intelligence.
Huge changes. The mass expulsion of hundreds of Russian diplomats across the West, many of whom were intelligence officers under official cover, crippled their traditional human capabilities overnight.
So they had to rely more on the illegals.
Exactly. The burden shifted dramatically onto the deep cover networks. Sleepers were likely activated, asked to take on more daring espionage tasks, which of course makes them much more vulnerable to detection.
And we saw arrests happening, right? Like in Slovenia?
Precisely. Maria Mayer and Ludwig Dolcev, posing as an Argentinian gallery owner and an IT guy. Slovenia was a smart base inside the Schengen zone, easy travel across Europe. Police found a huge stash of cash hidden in their fridge, hundreds of thousands of euros, likely operational funds activated after the invasion started.
But it's not just the classic long-term illegals anymore, is it? There are other types of operatives now, these flying illegals.
Right, that's more associated with the GRU, military intelligence, specifically Unit 29155. These aren't people building lives for decades. They use short-term, often fake identities, maybe posing as tourists or businessmen, perhaps using dodgy passports from places like Moldova.
And they're used for specific high-risk jobs.
Exactly. Things like sabotage, assassinations. The Novichok poisoning of Sergei Skripal in Salisbury is linked to them. They fly in, do the job, and fly out. Quick, deniable actions.
And then there's the completely different category, the virtual illegal.
This might be the biggest shift. Think of operations run by groups like the Internet Research Agency, the IRA. They create entirely fake online personas.
Like that Matt Skiber guy during the U.S. election.
Exactly. A completely fabricated online personality designed to sow discord, amplify divisions, even organize real-world rallies, all while influencing potentially millions of people online.
And the cost-benefit compared to a traditional illegal.
It's incomparable. Think about Don Heathfield. Years of training, huge budget, decades of sacrifice, massive personal risk. Now think about Matt Skiber, maybe a few hours work, some burner accounts, basic IT. You can create a virtual legal, use them to disrupt an election, and then just delete them. Minimal cost, minimal risk, maximum plausible deniability. It's devastatingly efficient for influence operations. Hashtag tag outro.
It really is incredible when you step back and look at it. These core ideas, konspiratsiya, compartmentalization, they've survived for over a century.
Yeah.
Through revolution, purges, the Cold War, the internet age.
That resilience is maybe the key takeaway. The principles are incredibly durable. And even now, in this age of AI, biometrics, constant surveillance, which makes creating that perfect long-term physical cover harder than ever.
Yeah, you'd think it's almost impossible now.
It's definitely harder. But the sources suggest that even with all the tech, the human element is still seen as crucial. For influence, maybe virtual personas work. But when it comes down to the moment of truth, needing subtle human analysis or needing someone to take direct physical action inside a system, you still need a person.
The person on the ground.
The person who can look Oldham in the eyes or get close enough to Tito or understand the nuances the machine can't. Technology makes the cover harder, but the human spy might still be seen as irreplaceable for certain tasks.
It's a real paradox.
And it brings us back to the cost. The psychological damage to the agents, the betrayal of families like Peter Herman's or the couple who left their baby, the risk of torture, prison.
Yet Russia keeps investing in it.
Consistently. By reviving the program, by relying on it more heavily now after the diplomat expulsions, the Russian state signals that it sees this capability, this shadow network, as a necessary price, the price of being a first-tier nation with global reach.
So with hundreds of official spies picked out recently, the pressure on the illegals must be immense. Which leaves us with a pretty unsettling final thought, doesn't it?
It does. How many more perfectly ordinary-seeming people, soccer moms, IT consultants, art gallery owners, are out there right now, living quiet lives, fully integrated, just waiting for that one signal from the center to activate them for whatever comes next?